One great myth in American society is that Osama bin Laden was responsible for the 9/11 terror attacks. A few days after 9/11, bin Laden released a statement to Al Jazeera News that said, quote, "The U.S. government has consistently blamed me for being behind every occasion its enemies attack it. I would like to assure the world that I did not plan the recent attacks, which seems to have been planned by people for personal reasons. I have been living in the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan and following its leader's rules. The current leader does not allow me to exercise such operations." End quote. See the CNN article link below for details. The American CIA had anointed bin Laden as head of Al-Qaeda. This is a mythical organization invented as a national security threat after the Cold War ended. Any Muslim group around the world that attacked Western interests was labeled Al-Qaeda. Bin Laden only controlled his group of 50 followers in Afghanistan, although he sometimes funneled charity donations from wealthy Saudis to Muslim groups. After 9/11, Secretary of State Colin Powell promised Americans his State Department would issue a white paper detailing bin Laden's guilt. Afghanistan's Taliban government asked for this document before it would extradite bin Laden, as the U.S. was demanding. No evidence was ever presented, and the U.S. Justice Department never indicted him for the attacks. A Kuwaiti was blamed for the 9/11 attacks and remains in prison without trial over 20 years later.
Just days before the anniversary of 9/11, the pre-trial hearing for the alleged mastermind of the terror attacks, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, is set to resume. 4 others linked to the attacks are also facing court proceedings today. NBC News national security correspondent Ken Delaney joins us now from the military court in Guantanamo Bay. So, Ken, first of all, remind us, who is Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and what is the role he's accused of playing in 9/11?
Good morning, Joe. He's known as KSM for short, and by his own words, he said he was responsible for the 9/11 operation from A to Z. That was in a 2007 confession. And look, intelligence officials say 9/11 would not happen without KSM. He planned it, he conceived it, he pitched it to Osama Bin Laden. The intelligence community did not know much about him until they learned of his role and then captured him in Pakistan in 2003. And then he was in CIA custody at a black site, and that's where things get sticky. He, we now know, was tortured, was waterboarded, was walled, was struck, a lot of really nasty things were done to him, and then he was transferred to Guantanamo Bay and interviewed separately by the FBI. And he has confessed to all manner of terrorist attacks in addition to the 9/11 attacks. But now some of those confessions are under challenge by defense lawyers who say they were tainted by torture. And that is one of the issues in these endless pretrial hearings that are happening here at Guantanamo Bay and that resume in the courtroom today, Joe.
Note the blatant lie in that report. There is no evidence that bin Laden was briefed on plans for the 9/11 attacks or knew anything about them. This reporter inserted a false CIA talking point because he works with the CIA. His name is Ken Delaney, who was fired from the Los Angeles Times in 2014 when editors learned that he sent drafts of his articles to the CIA for editing. See the article link below about this scandal. It is good to know the Los Angeles Times has some integrity, but the CIA instantly found Delaney a job at one of its key propaganda outlets, AP News, then placed him as a star reporter at another of its outlets, NBC News, where he spreads CIA propaganda, like Osama bin Laden did 9/11. None of the accused 9/11 hijackers were Afghans. There was no evidence any had traveled to Afghanistan, except for a rumor that two had done so years earlier. No hard evidence was produced, yet the U.S. military invaded Afghanistan without the legally required authorization from the United Nations. Soon after American troops arrived in eastern Afghanistan, Bin Laden slipped across the border into Pakistan. American troops remained, while thousands more American troops poured into Afghanistan to occupy the entire nation. Billions of dollars were spent to build massive new military bases in Afghanistan. The justification was to keep terrorists from planning future 9/11 attacks, although no one from Afghanistan was involved, and the planning was done in Germany and the United States. NATO nations sent thousands of troops to fight in Afghanistan after NATO Secretary General George Robertson invoked Article 5 of the Washington Treaty that calls for a collective defense because an attack on one member is an attack on all members. Robertson never released evidence that Osama bin Laden was involved in 9/11, claiming it was classified. As foreign troops poured into Afghanistan, the world was told that capturing bin Laden was not important.
Mr. President, in your speeches now, you rarely talk or mention Osama bin Laden. Why is that? Also, can you tell the American people if you have any more information, if you know if he is dead or alive? Final part here. Deep in your heart, don't you truly believe that until you find out if he is dead or alive, you won't really eliminate the threat of...
Well, deep in my heart, I know the man's on the run if he's alive at all. And who knows if he's hiding in some cave or not. We hadn't heard from him in a long time. And the idea of focusing on one person is really indicates to me people don't understand the scope of the mission. Terror is bigger than one person. And he's a person who's now been marginalized.
In December 2001, the Pentagon announced that it found a videotape of Osama bin Laden discussing his role in 9/11. It released a dark, blurry videotape with poor sound. This was hailed as hard proof, although many experts stated the man in the tape was not bin Laden, or the audio was obviously edited. The FBI and the U.S. Justice Department were not persuaded, as they still refused to charge bin Laden for the 9/11 attacks. Nevertheless, the Western corporate media and American politicians often state Osama bin Laden did 9/11. A good example was in 2011, when American President Barack Obama proclaimed his team had killed Osama bin Laden to kick off his re-election campaign.
Good evening. Tonight, I can report to the American people and to the world that the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of al-Qaeda, and a terrorist who's responsible for the murder of thousands of innocent men, women, and children.
President Obama repeatedly suggested that bin Laden was responsible for the 9/11 attacks and immediately went to New York to lay a wreath on the World Trade Center site. The FBI had never released evidence that Osama bin Laden was involved in the 9/11 attacks, nor has anyone else. Osama bin Laden is blamed for 9/11 to discourage investigation as to who was really responsible. Evidence emerged that high-level officials in the government of Saudi Arabia funded the 9/11 attacks. They were allied with Israel and the Bush family, who openly discussed the need for a, quote, Pearl Harbor event to declare war to conquer 7 Muslim nations in 5 years.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me, and one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda? He said, no. He says, there's nothing new that way. They've just made the decision to go to war with Iraq. He said, I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments. And he said, I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail. So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, are we still going to war with Iraq? And he said, oh, it's worse than that. He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran. I said, is it classified? He said, yes, sir.
President Bush was pressured to form a commission to investigate 9/11. It was not allowed to interview the accused mastermind, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who remains in prison without trial, nor any other Muslims arrested for terrorism. The Bush administration refused to answer repeated requests from the commission about who authorized charter flights for 140 Saudi Arabian citizens, including members of Osama Bin Laden's family, from the United States immediately after the 9/11 attacks. This occurred during a time when commercial flights in the United States were banned, and the FBI stated that it hadn't interviewed several suspects before they departed. In 2003, some hard evidence was released to congressional intelligence committees. Some members found it disturbing and began demanding the public release of what is called the 28 pages. It was finally released to the public in 2016 and is linked below. The U.S. Congress was unhappy with the 9/11 Commission. It formed its own joint commission headed by Senator Bob Graham. He later made interesting comments.
Well, it started with the disbelief that 19 people, most of whom didn't speak English, had never been in the United States, could have come here, plotted, practiced, and then executed such a complex plan as 9/11. My assumption had been that they had some support system that was already in place in the United States, which facilitated their activities.
Indication why this information was never revealed to the September 11th Commission?
No, but the same was true in San Diego. The FBI, although they were asked to provide the congressional inquiry all the information they had about 9/11, did not tell us about these extensive contacts in San Diego. It was because we had a very curious and effective investigative team which went to San Diego and was able to uncover the relationship between particularly a key Saudi agent living in San Diego and the first 2 hijackers to have entered the United States.
About the 9/11 Commission and the suppressed pages of that commission, what you believe is in them, and if it links to the Saudi royal family.
The suppressed pages were in the congressional joint inquiry. We worked diligently throughout 2002 to gather as much of the information as we could and to make recommendations. We had an 800-plus page report, one chapter of which related primarily to the role of the Saudis in 9/11, was totally censored. Every word of that chapter has been denied to the American people. As to the Saudis who escaped, the Michael Moore movie accurately depicts it. Prince Bandar, the ambassador of the United States for Saudi Arabia, shortly after 9/11, within hours, went to the president and asked that Saudis who were in the United States who felt that they might be subjected to some kind of adverse treatment because of the public attitude, knowing that 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudi, that he asked if they could exit the country as quickly as possible. The president approved that, even though domestic aviation in the United States was shut down, and approximately 140 Saudis, including several members of the Bin Laden family, left. The FBI later stated that there were people on that plane that the FBI would have desired to have interviewed before they left the United States, but were denied the opportunity to do so.
The corporate media states this evidence suggests Saudi involvement, but does not mention hard proof, like when the wife of the Saudi ambassador to the United States wrote large personal checks to the alleged hijackers. Recent revelations by the British showed connections with a Saudi intelligence officer, including video of him chatting with the hijackers at a private party.
Less than 2 weeks after 9/11, these boxes of evidence containing personal notes and videos were seized by British police in Birmingham, England. Buried inside, this home video from 2000, now being seen publicly for the first time. The event is described by the 9/11 Commission as a party at the San Diego apartment of two hijackers. While Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Midar avoided the camera, Midar can be seen here in the kitchen. Their team would later commandeer Flight 77, slamming it into the Pentagon. The party's host, a Saudi national, Omar al-Bayoumi, who British police arrested after 9/11, and from whom they seized the videos and documents. 3 years after the attack, the 9/11 Commission said there was no credible evidence that Bayoumi believed in violent extremism or knowingly aided extremist groups. Though a newly declassified FBI memo from 2017 reports Bayoumi was on the payroll of Saudi intelligence, a fact that was not confirmed at the time of the 9/11 Commission report.
I call him a facilitator because he helped them out.
Last fall, CBS News sat down with retired FBI agents Danny Gonzalez and Ken Williams, who investigated the hijacker support network. Both now work for the 9/11 families.
He helped them with apartments. He helped them with bank accounts.
He was also an employee of the government of Saudi Arabia.
Among the records, a notepad containing a handwritten drawing of a plane and mathematical equation that an expert said in a court filing could be used to calculate the rate of descent to a target.
It would take hours to present all the damning evidence of high-level Saudi involvement in the 9/11 attacks and the high-level cover-up led by the FBI. Private investigators have assembled lots of hard evidence, like this information broadcast from a local news outlet in Florida.
In the months that followed the 9/11 attacks, the federal government spent millions on investigations, interviewed thousands of people, and traveled the globe in search of evidence. Then Florida Senator Bob Graham, who led the Senate Intelligence Committee that investigated 9/11, said crucial information was never provided to Congress or the public. He fought for 15 years to get classified documents released.
Did these 19 people, most of whom did not speak English, most of whom had never been in the United States before, most of whom were not well educated, did they carry out this sophisticated task alone, or did they have some form of support while they were in the United States?
Graham believes that a family that lived in the upscale gated Prestancia neighborhood in Sarasota may have been involved. Abdulaziz Al-Hiji, a recent USF graduate, lived in this home with his wife Anud, where sources say they were visited by some of the hijackers before the 9/11 attack.
They had lived for about 5 or 6 years prior to this in this house that was owned by her father, a man by the name of Osama Ghazawi.
Journalist Dan Christensen, who was founder of the Florida Bulldog News website, broke the news of a potential Sarasota Saudi connection.
Ghazawi was a wealthy, politically connected individual.
Ghazawi, who married an American woman, was an advisor to Saudi Prince Fahad. We found these photos of Ghazawi in a lawsuit, posing with world leaders, including President George Bush, British Prime Minister Tony Blair, and Pakistani Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto. When they purchased the home in Prestancia for their daughter and son-in-law, records show that the Ghazawis listed this 4,200 square foot waterfront home in Longboat Key as their residence. It was sold in 1998 for $1.75 million. Back in Prestantia, neighbors reported the Al-Hijis, who allegedly had contact with the hijackers, abandoned their home in late August 2001.
This family had moved out hastily from the home about 2 weeks before 9/11. So hastily, in fact, they left behind their cars, clothes, jewelry.
An investigation began days after the September 11th attack.
I understand that FDLE was involved at some point, some of the local police. It was more than just the FBI, correct?
Oh, yes. There was a joint terrorism task force that included the county sheriff, Sarasota PD. FDLE, of course, was involved in all this. And that's where we managed to get a lot of the information early on here.
An FDLE report indicated the Al-Hijis and Ghazawis were both on the FBI watch list. And Christensen later uncovered from multiple sources that 9/11 hijackers visited the home.
Their license tags were photographed, and they had to fill out forms to be admitted to get in the first place.
When that story was surfaced, the FBI's response was, in a public statement, that it had done a complete investigation of the situation in Sarasota, that it had found no connections between the hijackers and the prominent Saudi family.
When Christensen sought records through the Freedom of Information Act, he was told they didn't exist, leading him to sue the FBI for the records. The FBI eventually sent Christensen this report in which an agent said there were many connections between the family and the 9/11 hijackers. A federal judge ultimately ordered the FBI to produce the requested documents.
They told the judge in the case that the Tampa field office had 80,000 pages related to 9/11 that were generated by their office, and that they were all classified, every page.
Sarasota private investigator Bill Warner simultaneously started his own investigation.
And they were here, like in my neighborhood. So I had to look at it, I kept looking at it.
Warner partnered with police, sheriff's deputies, and was eventually paid by ICE for providing surveillance photos and phone bills he collected from the garbage cans of people of interest.
Where were they calling?
All over the world. I mean, anywhere and everywhere. Lots in the Middle East. Their bills, you can see they're $1,200, $1,500, $2,000, sometimes $4,000 a month.
And these are people living in a dumpy...
These are guys that living in duplexes, driving old cars, who don't have a job.
Warner learned some of the people he surveilled had ties to terrorism.
I was upset by 9/11, everybody was. So I was going to do whatever I could do to find out if there was really a support network here.
In Tampa Bay, there are still plenty of questions awaiting answers.
We are entitled to know what happened, what changed the skyline of the biggest city in the country and killed 3,000 people.
I'm I-Team investigator Adam Walser, taking action for you.